Well, first of all, bring us up to speed. Where are we at with SB 181, and what are your thoughts on the legislation?
So basically, it passed through the three committees now already. As you mentioned, it just dropped last Friday, and then there was 1,000 people that showed up at the Capitol on Tuesday, and you were one of the people who testified. 400 people testified. I think the process is going much too quickly. The Denver Post commented on that in an op-ed, in a column basically saying, slow your roll, Democrats, about that and the death penalty legislation, which went through committee really quickly, too. But I think with oil and gas, I mean, you look at when you have Democrats like Ken Salazar, former Mayor Wellington Webb, coming out and saying this needs to stop, this isn't good for us. I think people need to listen, and really there was no stakeholder process at all. And the Democrat legislators who were bringing this said, basically there's a new sheriff in town. You're not going to be able to write this legislation. But this impacts a lot of people's lives. You're talking tens of thousands of jobs. It's a $30 billion a year industry here. They need to have how is this going to impact people, and especially in places like Weld County. So I think the process has been horrible. I think the bill is horrible, and it's going to have a long impact on our economy.
Well, then you look at places like Mesa County. There was a bunch of folks that testified remotely from Grand Junction. The one that most stood out to my mind was, and I'm paraphrasing the first part, but the final sentence is verbatim, what a teacher said, a public school teacher, got on and testified and said, marijuana's not funding our schools. What's your plan B? Some of these parts of the state really rely on the oil and gas industry to be able to fund their schools, which I thought was very important to the folks who are advocating for SB 181.
Absolutely. Local revenue that comes from oil and gas, it's $650+ million a year that goes to education in this state from oil and gas. And the impact that that's going to have, especially, there's all these stories about how, rural schools are having a hard time keeping up of attracting teachers, and basically we know we need to get more money in the classroom, but if the money's not there on the local level, you're going to have a hard time, funding these schools where on the Front Range we have a lot of different economic, here in the metro area we have a lot of different ways to get that local revenue. In Mesa County and Weld County, it's going to have a huge impact. So this is not just about oil and gas. It's not just about the jobs that surround the oil and gas industry. It also has to do with education and local services like fire.
So you talked about the stakeholder process, or the lack thereof. That is to say, most especially that the oil and gas industry did not get to see the text of the legislation until it finally dropped that Friday, 2 Fridays ago, at 4:30, 5 o'clock. So close of business, in essence, at the Capitol on a Friday. And then, of course, 3 days later, you had the testimony. Well, I want to play cut 2 here. It's a little montage I put together of some audio of Senate Majority Leader Steve Fenberg, who is the Senate sponsor of this bill. And again, it's currently in the Senate moving through that body's process. And you have 2 different clips here. One is him giving testimony. This is the first one of him giving testimony before the Senate Transportation and Energy Committee last Tuesday afternoon. And then the other clip is from February, where he talked to a crowd in a town hall in Boulder, where he is a state senator. And you'll notice an interesting contradiction about whether or not he provided copy of the text and gave opportunity for advocates of this oil and gas legislation to review it beforehand. And I did this montage with a little help from Foghorn Leghorn. Cut 2.
That dog's like taxes. He just don't know when to stop.
Senator Scott, I did not provide the bill language to anybody. Even when the industry was telling my own constituents that they had advanced copies of the bill language, that was not true. I also did not provide the bill language to people who are here today that I assume are proponents of the bill. The bill language, the actual bill itself, was something that I was working on up until it was introduced, something the Speaker of the House was involved in up until it was introduced, as well as the people that will be helping implement this. And folks that were shared the bill language were only for fiscal note purposes. I believe CML and CCI get bill drafts when they're developing input to the fiscal note process. That started about a month ago. So local governments, or at least People that were on a need-to-know basis, I believe, had this. But it was not shared with advocates, proponents, or opponents before the bill was public. Because in my opinion, this is a very tough topic. It's politically sensitive. And I don't think I think a stakeholder process is important. I believe input and feedback around the concepts and some of the language as you talk through it is important.
The people that have seen this draft of what we're working on, that actually know what's in it, are the two of us and the drafter and advocates, many of which are probably in the audience, first of all, and people that actually would help implement the regulations that work in the state government.
So you
That's who's working to make sure.
Conversation with oil and gas agreeing to let them preview the bill before it drops?
No.
It was not shared with advocates, proponents, or opponents before the bill was public.
The people that have seen this draft of what we're working on, that actually know what's in it, are the two of us and the drafter and advocates, many of which are probably in the audience.
That dog is lower than a snake full of buckshot.
It was not shared with advocates.
Shut up!
Which Fenberg was telling the truth? The one before the Senate committee or the one before a town hall mostly of activists, anti-oil and gas activists? Michael Fields.
Well, I think both of those statements obviously can't be true. And I think, that's something we might find out. There's a core request process here in Colorado where you can find out who has had influence on legislation, who has been talking about it with other people. So I think that's something that might end up coming out, and we might get the answer to that anyway. But I think, the point is, there was not, obviously industry who it was going to impact was not talked to at all on this, and they were kind of up in arms during this process because, you think about it, if it's going to be this hard of a process in order to, go and get our energy here in Colorado, there's other places to go. These oil and gas companies can say, you know what, there's other states that would love to have us, and places like Weld County end up, getting out of a lot of revenue, a lot of jobs in that area. So I'm concerned about it. I mean, I think what the fiscal note, what Fenberg was talking about, the fiscal note came out and it said it would be plus $3 million after this bill, which is just absurd. This process is going way too fast if that's the kind of fiscal note that's coming out.
And I think that the most likely scenario, if they continue at this pace, is that we will see, maybe with a couple of little tweaks in the Senate, but I don't know what those would be, that this is on the road to passage and essentially, Michael Fields, overriding the will of the voters with Proposition 112, in this case with legislation that is even worse.
Yeah, and this is the key here is this is just another way to try to get around. I mean, I talk a lot about how they try to get around Tabor all the time. I think this is a way to try to get around 112 and have the same kind of impact. And you know it because the Colorado Rising, the group head by Joe Salazar, is out there saying, we're going to find any and every way to stop energy development in the state. And they're supporting this bill. They're working, with the advocates on this bill. So I think, you look at local control. They're giving it to, certain localities that want to ban, this kind of energy development, this oil and gas development. Weld County wants it, and they're not giving them local control to have, this continue in their area. They say, if you want to go further environmentalist, that's okay. But if you don't, then no, you don't have local control. So I think you're going to have a lot of pushback.
Right.
I think there's a lot of things at the legislature that are happening right now that seems to be going too fast, too much of a big impact on our economy. And, Colorado's economy is number one. Is it going to be number one in 2 or 4 years? We're going to see.
Well, just one quick thing, and this is very striking that when we're talking about as you were saying, the Weld County example of maybe wanting a little less regulation in their county, it is the case that in this bill, whichever is more stringent in regulations, the local community or the state Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, the more stringent one prevails, therefore that weakening the local control of those communities that may want to be a little lighter on oil and gas regulation. But the other thing when you're looking at this is, look, they strip out the requirement that the COGCC, the commission, actually has to consider for environmental-based regulations whether it is technically feasible and cost-effective for the industry to comply with those regulations. Yeah,
it's getting rid of the economic side of this almost totally and talking about only with what they would call, the health and safety stuff, the wildlife and everything else. I think we've had a really good system for a long time of balancing these things. Of course, health and safety is very important. What we're scared of is regulators coming in and saying, you know what, anything, we don't want it here, so we're going to find any reason for it not to happen, even though, as Governor Hickenlooper said, it's safe. We have some of the toughest regulations in the country already. So I don't think that the system was messed up at all. I think we're going and searching for a problem and trying to find a way really to ban this more and more to stop this energy production, and it will have a huge impact on our economy.
Just one last thing. I've got less than a minute left with you, Michael Fields, Executive Director of Colorado Rising Action. And the question is, overall, in terms of this legislative session, how much do you think the Democrats are overreaching?
I think a lot. I think we've seen a lot in the last 2 or 3 weeks, especially. Family leave just came out, which I think violates Tabor. There's a ton of bills about all kinds of stuff that have dropped this last 2 weeks. So I think they are. I don't think there's one bill necessarily. Maybe oil and gas is the closest one that's going to, there's like 2013 and the recalls, but I think it's a little, it's little slices here and there that people are getting upset about. It's a process that does not work. Where the Democrats are not bringing in stakeholders. So I think it's going to be a long process. But I think in 2 or 4 years, people are going to look back and say, is our state better off than it was when we handed over complete control to the Democrats? And I hope that it's going well, but I don't know. I mean, given these bills that are coming up, I'm really worried about it.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you there. All right, Michael Fields, always great to check in with you, sir. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thanks, Jimmy.